the morning of November 6, 1885, the fifth day of the war, following a sleepless night in Sofia, all eyes are fixed on the defensive lines of Slivnitsa. Yet the first combat operations of this momentous day, which would ultimately prove pivotal for the entire course of the war, erupt unexpectedly elsewhere, some 40 kilometers north of the main position. At 4 o'clock in the morning, while the government cabinet gathers for an emergency session far from the primary grid of fire, a daring strike is launched on the northern strategic flank within the village of Komštitsa. Merely hours earlier, on the evening of November 5th, in the village of Šuma, the young second lieutenant Zafirov learns that the Serbian cavalry screening the villages of Ravno and Ropot has withdrawn to reinforce the impending grand assault on Slivnitsa. Driven by an audacious instinct, Zafirov resolves to seize the initiative and advance westward. However, shortly afterwards, Captain Costa Punitsa arrives in Buchino with Macedonian volunteers and reservists, issuing two consecutive, unequivocal commands. Cease all offensive operations.
Не атакувайте! Дръжте позициите!
But in this war, destiny is forged by raw defiance and the fiery impulse of youth. Refusing to submit a written compliance, Lieutenant Zafirov mounts his horse in the dead of night. By 9 o'clock that evening, he stands face to face with Punitsa in Buchino. Declaring that any delay would be a fatal mistake, the young officer breaks his commander's resolve. Captain Punitsa relents, endorsing the plan. Thus, at 4 o'clock on this fateful November 6th, Zafirov's detachment departs from Godech in absolute silence. Under his command stands a single half-company, a handful of volunteers, and 4 local militia units drawn from Komštitsa, Izyatovci, Bukarov, and Goleš. By 7 o'clock, the vanguard scouts approach the Serbian positions east of the village of Ropot, where 2 companies of the 15th Serbian Regiment lie under the command of Major Milosevic. The Serbians are caught completely unprepared. Most are sound asleep, while others are only beginning their morning routines. The Bulgarian advance guard descends into the ravine without firing a single shot. By the time they close to within 300 meters of the enemy line, the tactical surprise is absolute. Instantly panicked, the Serbian soldiers scramble frantically for their rifles, opening a chaotic, disorganized fire. The Bulgarians reply with heavy, synchronized volleys. Then, precisely as orchestrated, the Bulgarian militiamen hidden in the adjacent forest unleash an inhuman, deafening roar. Hurrah! The psychological shock breaks the Serbians, sending them fleeing in utter disarray. They leave behind 1 fallen officer, 30 dead soldiers on the field, and 42 captured prisoners. Not a single Serbian soldier managed to reach Komštitsa to sound the alarm for the remainder of their battalion. Without squandering a single second, Zafirov regrouped his forces and pressed his advance toward Komštitsa itself. From the direction of the village of Ginci volunteers erupted as Zafirov struck the Serbians directly in their rear. Seized by absolute terror, the Serbian soldiers broke into a panicked flight. Their commander, Major Milosevic, fled frantically down the main road, accompanied only by a solitary bugler. The Bulgarian skirmish lines descended upon the village of Komštitsa, initiating a sweeping sweep for captives, netting a total of 163 prisoners. The scene was enchanting, Lieutenant Zafirov later recorded in his journal, and no pleasure or rapture in the world can compare to it. From all sides, terrified prisoners were led to me, a large portion of whom were Bulgarians, citizens of Pirot. Some of the latter immediately enlisted as volunteers in the Bulgarian army. Simultaneously, Captain Punitsa, aided by Macedonian volunteers wielding vast experience in unconventional guerrilla warfare, managed to rout the first squadron of the Serbian cavalry brigade near the village of Tudun, which had been dispatched to reconnoiter along the Kalotina River. This minor, seemingly insignificant victory far to the north would ultimately prove decisive for the course of the combat operations before Sливница on November 6th. By the time Captain Punitsa reached Komštitsa, the extreme strategic northern flank had been cleared. The Serbian detachment was completely broken and driven back toward the border. Against the gathered troops, the captain embraced and kissed Zafirov and his irregular fighters, entirely unaware of how vital his actions would subsequently prove.
Браво, Атила. Браво, момче.
Meanwhile, at the main position at Slivnitsa, a fierce, freezing wind had spent the entire night battering the bare, rocky hills. Exhausted to their absolute limits, the Bulgarian soldiers lay shivering in the numbing frost. By virtue of the midnight decisions of the Council of War, approved by the Commander-in-Chief, Prince Alexander I, Captain Benderev was ordered to withdraw the scattered units of the right flank back to their original starting positions for reorganization. Rumors of this command rippled through the field, an order formulated by Benderev to the senior commander, whoever he may be, in the village of Goliamo Nalabo. Retreat immediately to your old positions at the Slivnitsa line, for you risk being cut off and driven back toward Berkovica. Consequently, before dawn, the Bulgarian units abandoned the crucial heights around Meka Threv. The last to withdraw was the commander of the 1st Bdin Company and his men, who had spent the night sleeping in the rocky hollows along the slope. He noted in his diary, "In the morning, Captain Benderev came to me and told me to remain in cover of Captain Stoyanov's battery. At the same time, giving me his horse, he asked me to go forward and deliver the order to all units to retreat to their old positions at the Slivnitsa line." Managing the retreat from Malovo, Captain Kutinchev led his 1st Danube Druzhina down under Serbian artillery fire from the crest of Meka Tsarev. Although the volleys proved harmless due to the extreme distance, it became starkly clear that the summit had already been reclaimed by the enemy following the Bulgarian withdrawal. Thus, early in the morning, at the break of dawn, the units of the right flank began to deploy once more between the main road and Leshta Peak. The physical condition of the soldiers on this flank in the freezing morning hours revealed an absolute exhaustion. Captain Paprikov, Chief of Staff of the Western Corps, described the poignant scene at the positions. The weather was cold, damp, and foggy, the ground covered in snow. The soldiers were so exhausted they resembled corpses. Some wore white cloths instead of caps. They lay down in the snow, curled up like cats, shivering from the cold. Furthermore, they were starving, having received bread only on the morning of the 5th. Warm food was entirely out of question. Among the officers, traditional rawhide footwear had replaced boots, and sheepskin coats took the place of greatcoats. Fortunately for the defenders, the Danube Division, which stood opposite the disrupted Bulgarian right flank, showed little desire to engage in combat that day. Arthur von Hun recalled, "All eyes were turned toward the right flank, expecting a Serbian attack at any moment. Fortunately, the Serbians remained true to their habits this time as well and paid little heed to our right wing. They had likely been convinced since the very first encounter that Benderev and his men were not to be trifled with, and their bayonets were deadly." By dawn, following the overnight arrival of the first 2 echelons of reinforcements from Thrace, the Bulgarians commanded 24 družinas, active, reserve, volunteer, and militia, and 8 squadrons, totaling approximately 20,000 bayonets, 600 sabres, and 40 artillery pieces. Facing them stood the Serbian forces, comprising 28 battalions, 11 squadrons, 16 batteries, totaling around 25,000 rifles, 1,300 sabres, and 96 artillery pieces. Yet this Serbian superiority could have turned fatal if, on that very day, the Morava division with its 9 battalions and 24 guns were to strike Slivnitsa from the direction of Breznik. Around 8 o'clock, the tense silence within the fog was shattered by the first shots in the center of the front. The planned Serbian general assault had begun. The Drina division, which had withdrawn and entrenched itself about a kilometer from the Bulgarian position the night before, opened fire on the battery and the Bulgarian trenches north of Aldemirovici. The 4th Regiment of the same division advanced dangerously close to the defenders' positions, but its oncoming ranks were met with a devastating volley from the 3rd Pleven Druzhina and shrapnel of the guns of the 6th Battery. The Serbian companies buckled under the fire, and at that exact moment, upon a signal given by the commander of the centre, Captain Petrov, the 3rd Druzhina of the 4th Pleven Regiment launched a bayonet charge against the faltering Serbian lines. The Serbians initially fired in a disorganized manner, but soon broke and turned to flight. The Bulgarians reached their trenches and captured 15 prisoners before returning to their starting positions by order of Captain Petrov. Arthur von Hün, who observed the battle alongside the Bulgarian prince, recalled, "The Bulgarian battery was the first to open fire against the Serbian artillery, clearly demonstrating that our Krupp guns were far superior to the obsolete Serbian cannons. The Serbian artillery could not withstand the fire of our battery. It was forced to withdraw after a short time and with heavy losses. Our shells struck with terrible precision into the living targets. From the battery, we looked upon this gruesome slaughter of men as if from a theatre box." The prince suddenly lowered his telescope and stepped down from the parapet. He cried, "It is shameful that I am forced to slaughter these poor and innocent people, and for what? For a foolish and vile policy. I only wish King Milan could have heard these noble words of Prince Alexander, whom he wished to ruin along with his country." Thus, by early afternoon, the combat in the central sector of the position died down, with both sides merely maintaining sporadic infantry and artillery fire. Meanwhile, in Saribrod, the aforementioned King Milan was paralyzed by the shocking news that the Bulgarians were massing troops in Godech and advancing into the Serbian rear along the Kalotina River. The Serbian High Command was seized by tremendous consternation, and it was immediately decided to depart for Pirot. Captain Nesic tried to convince the king to head to the battlefield instead of Pirot, but the king, imagining that the Serbian political émigrés were among Panizza's volunteers, replied, "I cannot remain here. I will not have Pasic and his comrades lead me bound through Sofia."
Dok se ne pojave sve divizije Slivnice, ne mislim da su ići na bojište.
The king then added that, according to reports from abroad, troops from Rumelia were arriving towards Sofia and might have already reached Slivnitsa. He decided to summon all remaining troops from Serbia and mobilize the uncalled reservists of the 1st and 2nd bands. Meanwhile, every half hour, the Serbian High Command dispatched dozens of contradictory orders and counter-orders to redeploy and consolidate the divisions at the front, with the latest concluding with the words, "The Bulgarians may well be advancing along the Kalotina River. Quickly, therefore, dispatch a detachment of infantry, at least a regiment, against them. Send all dispatches to Pirot." And while this order rushed towards Slivnitsa, the Serbian Supreme Command galloped toward Pirot, while Captain Panizza and his detachment advanced north, liberating the village of Komštica in a direction completely opposite to the Kalotina River. The daring Bulgarian captain had no inkling that his modest victory had forced the Serbian commander-in-chief himself, along with the entire staff, to retreat 30 kilometers back from the front line. At the same time, the Bulgarian command realized that the withdrawal from the Tri Ushi heights had been a strategic blunder. The hill of Meka Trev had been reoccupied by the Serbians, and if they succeeded in hauling artillery onto its crest, the Bulgarian right flank would be doomed. Indeed, Meka Trev loomed ominously over the heads of the troops in the right sector. Because so many lives had been sacrificed to capture it on November 5th, only for it to be abandoned through the fault of the headquarters, everyone was resolute to retake it. The assault was entrusted to the commander of the 3rd Dean Regiment, Captain Marinov. Undaunted by the thick fog, he led forward the 2nd Dean Druzhina of his faithful comrade, Captain Toshev, the 1st Pleven Druzhina under Captain Blinov, which had arrived during the night from Thrace just in the nick of time, and the mountain battery of Captain Silyanovsky. Opposing him, Lieutenant Colonel Koka Milanovic had deployed 5 battalions and 4 batteries from the Serbian Danube division. A few cannon shots shattered the fog, the signal to attack. Captain Marinov led his men forward, and Captain Toshev later recalled, Marinov, standing by a small grove, encouraged the companies as they filed past him. In 5 minutes, we must be up there, he shouted, brandishing his saber threateningly toward the mist-shrouded Meka Threv. Then he turned to me. You support from over there, and I will from here, and in 10 minutes we must be at the top. He said, an immense determination carved into his pale face, his eyes flashing with fire. The Bulgarian companies advanced in an echelon formation to protect the reserves from the frantic Serbian rapid fire. This staggered tactical layout was adopted because, as Captain Benderev noted, from previous assaults, the Bulgarians had observed the Serbians' tendency to open fire from extreme distances, making their overshooting bullets more lethal to the deep reserves than to the frontline skirmishers. The German military observer, von Huhn, would later write in astonishment, a terrible fire which the Serbians maintained for nearly an hour. The shooting did not cease for even half a minute, yet, as fast as the Serbians fired, their aim was equally poor. At that crucial moment, however, a rider dispatched by the Corps headquarters arrived with word that those firing from the summit opposite were not Serbians, but Bulgarians. For this reason alone, the Družinas retraced their steps back to their starting lines, and the assault on Meka Threv was aborted. Yet on the return march, a horrific scene unfolded before the Bulgarian troops, as Captain Toshev would later recall. I shall never forget the poignant scenes I witnessed in the sector of that advance, where yesterday's 7-hour battle had raged. Behind every boulder, several wounded soldiers could be seen. They had spent a full 20 hours on those ridges without any medical aid whatsoever, looking already as if they were dead. Forgive us, heroes. All night long you waited in vain for help from your own. In vain you listened to every sound, hoping to hear a brotherly voice. Forgive us, for we were inexperienced. Forgive us because in our fury toward the enemy we thought only of his destruction. Forgive us, for we have avenged you dearly.
Вземете ме, господин капитан. Моля, не ме оставяйте.
Please take me too. Oh God, do not leave me. These unfortunate souls suddenly began to plead, tears welling in their eyes. One would need a heart harder than the crags of Meka Threv not to order their recovery. In an instant, my soldiers transformed into field medics. On that day, the 1st Pleven Družina fulfilled a brotherly duty, snatching 40 to 50 wounded brothers from certain death. Meanwhile, it became clear that the summit was indeed held by Serbians, not Bulgarians, and Prince Alexander personally ordered the assault to be renewed. He observed the unfolding attack himself from the lunette of the 6th Battery. The Bulgarians adapted swiftly, noticing that their losses from Serbian fire were heavier in the reserves than on the front line. Moving relentlessly, crawling up the rocky precipices, the vanguard companies closed to within 300 meters of the Serbians and prepared for a bayonet charge. Simultaneously, the 6th Battery rained shrapnel down upon the crest, further shattering the resolve of the Serbian units. When the Bulgarian command for a bayonet charge was given, and the companies surged forward with a thunderous roar of "Hurrah!" the Serbians did not wait for the collision and scattered in flight. Through the ominous fog, the triumphant strains of Shumi Maritsa began to drift. Captain Toshev remembered. Suddenly, Shumi Maritsa was taken up by 3,000 voices. A solemn "Hurrah!" pierced the fog, sweeping like a whirlwind toward the Dragoman Mountains. Marinov and Balinov were beaming with wide, joyful smiles. The commander of the 3rd Battalion of the 7th Serbian Regiment defended himself revolver in hand until he perished. The dense fog hindered any pursuit, and the casualties on the Bulgarian right flank amounted to approximately 100 killed and wounded, while Serbian losses on the right wing remain unknown. This fateful day marked the first appearance among their ranks of self-inflicted wounds, soldiers desperately attempting to evade a confrontation with Bulgarian bayonets on the battlefield. Yet while the Bulgarian heroes triumphed on Meka Tref, an impressive tactical chess match was unfolding on the left flank. There, the commanders of the Shumadia and Drina divisions chose to largely ignore the contradictory orders of their high command and agreed upon a coordinated joint operation. The Shumadia regiments were to deploy south of the Drina units, enveloping the Bulgarian left flank, and launch their assault the moment the Morava division arrived from Breznik. Such a development foreboded the certain encirclement of the Bulgarian left flank, but at this critical juncture, the commander of the sector, Captain Mikhail Savov, demonstrated exceptional tactical acumen and immediately saw through the Serbian plan. Recognizing the frontal operations of the Drina regiments as a mere demonstration, he took decisive measures to counter the encirclement by the Shumadia division. As early as 8 a.m., Savov wrote to the Corps headquarters, on the left flank, great need for 2 mountain guns and 1 druzhina. While waiting for reinforcements, he set about strengthening the flank with the resources at his disposal. In the night, he had already dispatched the 2 volunteer detachments of Captain Kovalov to the summit of Gradishte, south of the village of Bratushkovo, where they managed to entrench themselves under the cover of darkness. Furthermore, Captain Savov withdrew 2 artillery pieces from the Preslav redoubt belonging to the battery of Captain Danajiev, who had fallen the previous day, and deployed them alongside the volunteers at Gradishte. These 10 Bulgarian guns engaged in a fierce duel with the 2 Shumadia batteries, critically delaying the Serbian encirclement. This bought Captain Savov the necessary time to extend his left flank using the druzhinas of the 1st Sofia regiments, which had arrived late the previous night. Prince Alexander was proven correct. Their sleepless heroic march from Thrace proved decisive in the battle of this 6th of November. Throughout the day, shrouded in fog, both Bulgarians and Serbians gradually extended their flanks along both banks of the Rakitska River, engaging in continuous firefights. As the exchange of fire intensified, Captain Savov dispatched the commander of the 7th Preslav Infantry Regiment to ascertain the course of the battle and the disposition of the enemy. Captain Dikov took 2 additional Preslav companies with him, while the volunteer druzhina of Captain Karajov, which had also arrived late the previous night, was dispatched to Vishaya Peak. These actions proved of immeasurable importance for holding the left flank over the next 2 days. By securing Vishaya, the Slivnitsa position found its natural anchor on the left flank, as this summit dominated all surrounding heights, rendering an enemy encirclement no longer dangerous. Yet Captain Savov began to turn an anxious eye even further south, toward Breznik. By noon, he informed the headquarters. From all reports, it appears the Serbians have advanced from the direction of Breznik. Significant gunfire can be heard toward the town. They are likely engaged with our forces in Breznik. And indeed, what was happening in Breznik? Where was the Morava division, which, according to the Serbian plan, were supposed to strike Slivnitsa in the flank from the south and initiate the general Serbian assault? Colonel Topalovich's Morava division was in Breznik, barely 10 kilometers from Slivnitsa. If these 7,000 active Serbian bayonets with 24 artillery pieces were to arrive on the battlefield on November 6th, Slivnitsa would fall. Yet these 7,000 bayonets did not arrive. Although the Morava division set out from Breznik in the morning and covered a large portion of the distance, it failed to reach Slivnitsa. The Chief of Staff of the army, Captain РачоПетров, stalled it by hurling the improvised Radomir detachment of Captain Kisov directly into its rear. His order from Sofia, issued as early as November 5th, read, "A fierce battle is raging under Slivnitsa. Advance on Breznik and the enemy's right flank with all the forces you command." The commander of the 2nd Struma Regiment, Captain Kisov, set out on a forced march from Radomir, leading 3 Dean companies, the remnants of 2 Struma druzhinas, the Radomir militia druzhina, and a volunteer detachment, totaling 1,900 soldiers without any artillery support whatsoever. In the evening of November 5th, following the detachment's departure, the rain turned to snow. The road, cleared but unpaved, became a swallowing swamp in which the soldiers' legs sunk up to their knees. The conditions deteriorated even further as the frost intensified, freezing the surface of the mud, which crumbled and shattered sharply under the heavy weight of the soldiers' boots. Toward midnight, a bitter winter gale swept in, freezing the wet uniforms of the men. In the village of Yardzilovtsi, intelligence regarding the enemy was received, namely that Breznik was occupied, that the adversary was numerous, at least 6,000 strong, and backed by formidable artillery. At dawn on November 6th, Captain Kisov, who had foresightedly ordered a portable telegraph apparatus and a telegraphist to be taken from Radomir, spliced the device into the Breznik wire connecting Breznik with Radomir, establishing a connection with the headquarters in Sofia. On this historic morning, as the guns of Slivnitsa set the dawn ablaze for a second consecutive day, Chief of Staff РачоПетров dispatched a chilling telegram. Occupy Breznik and hold the enemy at all costs. If the enemy has already departed for Slivnitsa, attack his rear to delay him. Employ all your forces and resources. The fate of our position and our army depends upon your holding out. We can lose a detachment, but save the army and the fatherland. The Bessarabian-Bulgarian captain Stefan Kisov, one of the saviors of the Samara flag and a hero of Shipka, fully grasped the profound gravity of the moment. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Captain Alexander Fudulaki, a fellow Bessarabian Bulgarian, he called upon every man to offer themselves up as a sacrifice for the salvation of the army and the fatherland, even if it meant leaving all their bones on the battlefield. At that very hour in Breznik, the commander of the Morava division, Colonel Topalovich, ordered an advance along the road to Slivnitsa, troubled by the absence of directives from the general staff and persistent rumors of a formidable Bulgarian force concealed in the vicinity, poised to strike that day. Nevertheless, the forward elements of the division had covered nearly half the distance to Slivnitsa before the Bulgarian detachment caught them completely by surprise from the rear. At 12 o'clock noon, the Bdin and Struma companies deployed into battle order and stormed the Breznik heights of Sveti Nikola and Sveta Troitsa. The colonel and his entire general staff immediately mounted their horses and galloped towards the troops on the Slivnitsa road to halt the units and turn them back. The commanders of the Serbian vanguard, however, did not wait for the formal directive. The moment they heard the gunfire and the frantic alarm signals behind them, they initiated a chaotic retreat backward towards Breznik. Meanwhile, the formidable Serbian batteries rained down upon the advancing Bulgarians with absolute impunity. In spite of this, Lieutenant Dobrinov led his companies at a full sprint up the steep incline, throwing his men straight into the enemy trenches, only to be thrown back by the dense Serbian reserves. Realizing he was outflanked by an adversary that outnumbered him 4-1, Captain Kisov ordered the retreat to sound, which, under the hurricane of a devastating crossfire from the artillery, disintegrated into a disorganized rout. On the battlefield, the Bulgarians left behind over 300 killed, wounded, and captured, casualties inflicted principally by the heavy Serbian guns. The Radomir detachment was shattered. Viewed tactically, it was a severe defeat, yet viewed strategically, it proved to be the salvation of Bulgaria. Kisov's audacious assault utterly shocked Colonel Topalovich. Paralyzed by concern for his vulnerable rear, he halted the pursuit. Instead of marching immediately towards Slivnitsa, he postponed the advance by a full 24 hours and resolved to leave 2 entire battalions behind as a defensive garrison in Breznik. With their ultimate sacrifice, the handful of Struma and Bdin men, alongside the Radomir militia, bought the most precious currency in warfare, time. They did not merely delay the Morava division by a fateful day, but fractured it so deeply that out of its original 9 battalions, barely 4 would appear at Slivnitsa the following morning. These nameless heroes left their bones near Breznik to ensure that Slivnitsa remained impregnable. the oath to the fatherland had been fulfilled. Yet, at the close of this long and bloody day, the Bulgarian headquarters lacked any intelligence regarding the movements of the Serbians following the Battle of Breznik. Despite the triumphs at Komštitsa and on the right flank at Slivnitsa, the command of the Western Corps considered the situation not only more severe than on the evening of the 5th, but profoundly critical. In the wake of the Morava Division's success at Breznik, its strength was heavily exaggerated by the retreating militiamen and volunteers. The Bulgarian commanders, who failed to anticipate that the enemy would remain overnight in Breznik, could not divine where the division was heading, whether it was moving against the left flank of Slivnitsa or marching directly toward the capital. On the evening of the 6th, sector commanders and unit chiefs convened at the Corps headquarters, fearing that following the destruction of Captain Kisov's detachment, all pathways for the Morava Division lay open. Furthermore, no assistance could be expected from Sofia, as the army's chief of staff was gathering every available man to organize the defense of the capital against that very same division. Simultaneously, news reached Sofia of an unexpected Bulgarian victory at Belogradchik. Thus, while at Slivnitsa the unyielding Bulgarian spirit erected a wall of bayonets before the advancing Serbians, a parallel and brutal war was being waged north of the Balkan Mountains, where the strategic Bulgarian fortresses of Vidin and Belogradchik continued to hold out heroically. But what was truly unfolding across the snow-covered fields of northwestern Bulgaria? Would the commander of the northern detachment, Captain Uzanov, manage to overcome General Leshinin, the chief of the overwhelming Timok army? Who would prevail in this latest tactical chess match between the self-assured Serbian general and the brilliant Bulgarian captain? In the gathering darkness, both armies braced themselves for tomorrow's fateful November 7th, a day that would be written in letters of blood in the annals of world military history.